Good morning. Welcome to Metaverse City Summit Day 2. I am one of two handsome young gentlemen named Greg who we'll be hearing from this morning first thing as we recap Day 1 and set us up for the second day here as we gear up for the working day. So we have lots planned. We'll get into some of it here in terms of picking your brains for thinking about how cities particularly with the Metaverse. First, a short video. We're going to kick things off here, particularly for those of you who are patiently joining us in the Metaverse, and then I'll invite Greg to come on up. So, if you want to fire up that video, let's see it.
But Holland comes in for a pit stop. Time to refuel and change tires. Newmore himself changes the tires. Only 4 crew members, including the driver, are allowed to work on the car. It's a tense time. Holland stays in his seat, anxious to get away. Let's watch. Changed at last. A crewman polishes the windshield as Holland moves away just 67 seconds after he stops.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Greg Johnson. On behalf of fellow faculty at NYU, at SPS, I just want to welcome you all to Day 2. I thought it might be instructive to play a little bit of a video just to remind us that the conversations that have been curated for us over the last day and into today are taking place at a time not of just transformation, not just change, not linear change, but exponential change. Now, it's a little bit comical, not just for the fact that that pit stop involves somebody using a hammer to take off a wheel, but the fact that from 1950 to that point where the second pit stop took place also coincided with this period of unbelievable transformation in technology. Virtually all of the milestones that have come to represent the innovations that are leading to this thing we're talking about, this metaverse, took place during that time. From initial experiments with VR and AR and helicopter and kind of simulations to the sword of Damocles, which was the first headset that was done. All of this took place in this time. And we're about to enter another age of absolutely exponential tech. So I want to get us back on track with time. I may interrupt a little bit later on through the course of the day with a couple of the other observations that I do think are important. But one of the things that Liz said yesterday that I think is really, really critical in an age of exponential tech is that the tree is still young today. And that you in this room have a responsibility by participating in this summit to do something with your participation. There will be several calls of action today. One of those calls to action is to make sure that you are dialed into all of the information that you are hearing. To be able to communicate. I think we all have a responsibility to be in charge of communications. I'll leave you with this before I turn it over to the panel. Right now, the largest metaverse gathering in the world is taking place in Austin, Texas. By default, it's taking place at the largest crypto conference. Now, I'm a co-founder of a crypto digital asset company. I make no apologies for the noble participants in digital assets and crypto. But make no mistake about it, people outside of this room, in this city, okay, are not paying attention to the metaverse, and the brand of the metaverse is also somewhat in crisis. The people in this room are focused on the right topics with respect to the future. The people in this room are focused on the right topics with respect to the metaverse, focusing on utility, and utility not just randomly, but focused on cities. And so what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to be dialed in during the conversations, to commit to communicating wherever you can some of the learnings that you might have. And then over lunch, there's an exercise that we hope everybody will engage in very presently, and to stay present to see if we can come away with a couple of things to follow up more deeply. Again, as I said, I want to get us back on track. We have speakers with hard stops. So without further ado, I'll hand the mic back over to Greg, and we can get the panel going, and we'll take it from there, okay? So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, can we do another video ahead of the next panel?
Yes, fire that up, Carol.
Hey, I'm Mayor Tecklenburg of Charleston, South Carolina, John Tecklenburg. I wanted to chat with you about an amazing opportunity we have to use the Metaverse to help us on a very specific and critical potential projects in the city of Charleston. You know, we're a coastal city as well. And guess what? The sea level has been rising. We've been measuring it ourselves for the last 100 years. And it's risen here in Charleston well over a foot and projected to raise another foot in the next 20 to 30 years. We've partnered with our friends at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to study the possibility, the feasibility of a perimeter protection from sea level rise around the perimeter of the main part of our city. And the feasibility study was excellent and said it's worth trying to do. So the next thing to do is to design the project. Well, in the meantime, folks are already thinking about, oh, what is that going to look like? And they see examples of what some sea barrier walls have looked like before. We don't even want to call it that. We want to call it perimeter protection because things can be designed to look beautiful and have multiple purposes. But already citizens were getting scared and all like that. If we have a digital twin of Charleston while we're doing the design of this protection of our city, our citizens will be able to participate and see in real time what a proposed project would look like. So there's a great reason for us to pursue the creation of a Charleston digital twin. And off to the metaverse we go.
I guess I started getting really involved.
Stop. Sorry. We can show the other mayors later.
We'll save Mayor Sheedy for in a bit. Thank you so much for that. And that is a great framing for our opening session. I'll invite my speakers up there all at the back table. Just quick introductions, or I'll wait for them. Carolyn, are you joining us on the panel?
Yes.
All right, come on up, all three of you. I think this opening session here, we're going to do a sort of 30-minute discussion here, and I think Mayor Tecklenburg hit upon many of the themes that we're going to discuss here, which is particularly that notion of how do we use virtual representations or augmented representations to basically create space for dialogue and discussions around alternate futures, whether that is a seawall or perimeter wall, I should say, speaking to some of the language there, or perhaps a world without oil. And so I think it's very interesting to discuss this notion of the utility of the metaverse in the sense of how do we actually use it to change hearts and minds and sort of render what these alternate futures could be. So I have a great panel up here. I have Jaffe, who's at the center. She's the director of the Energy, Climate, Justice, and Sustainability Lab at NYU. My immediate right is Carolyn Kissane, who's Associated Dean of the NYU Center for Global Affairs. And joining us from Charleston on the far end is Paul Turner, who's the founder and CEO of Virtual America. So I believe we have some slides. This is, of course, a Metaverse conference, so visuals always help. Amy, if you want to go first, I know we can do that up first, but I want to start with perhaps, the more ambitious of the two, going from a perimeter wall for climate change and sea level rise to basically imagine a world of total mitigation. So let's start with the utopian vision right there.
Okay, so let's go to my slide.
So a little bit about the lab. We are a new lab, 2 years, and we are trying to sort of provide provocative thought leadership in the energy space, which is hard to do because there's so much discordant information. And so we had this idea that one of the things that inhibits people from embracing the energy transition is that you can't really picture it. And so our idea was, Carolyn had this insight that, so I was like, we have to do a multi-meeting, you have to be able to see how you would live in this future world. And then we thought, oh, the metaverse. We can do it in the metaverse. So next slide. So our tagline is seeing is believing. Next slide. And our plan is to build an immersive experience, both in Web3 and then also in VR, that would allow you to sort of have multiple experiences in this world that we're going to, say, in 2050 and so forth. And how would you actually live? You see people give you these view graphs, and we're going to use this much electricity more, and we're going to use solar panels, and batteries are going to be part of our way of life. And you see, Google experimenting with an autonomous car, and they tell you someday you're going to be able to just, push a button on your phone, and these autonomous things are going to pick you up. And you don't really know, how would that really be like? Like if you really weren't using fossil fuels. How would you heat and cool your home? What appliances would you have? How would you get around? What food would you eat? How would it get to you? So our idea was that in the metaverse, we could build that house for you. We could take you out on the city street for an evening, and you could just see what it looked like. So next slide. So our idea is that we would build experiences where you could meet friends in your house. You could plan dinner, but that at each level where you're just basically living your life and doing the kinds of things you do in the real world, that you could change your habits because you're living in a different way, but you could learn about what that way would be. So if you are in your house and everything's digital and you're going to tell your cube, Alexa, whatever cube it is, do this, do that. What people don't realize that's coming is someday, like in California last September, they had a heat wave, and everybody in the state of California got a text message telling them what appliances to turn off from what time to what time, and what to put the thermostat on. But actually, in the future, all of that's going to be automated. They're not going to text you. It's going to be pre-programmed. You're going to sign an agreement with whoever your service provider is, or you might actually have just an independent energy system that runs on its own and is not really using the grid, or somehow connected just to your community. And it's all going to be automated, so it's going to know. It's going to know when to charge your car and when you're taking a trip, because it's going to be connected to your calendar, and it's going to know when you're going somewhere, right? And it's going to know your habits. And then, you'll be able to adjust it if you're having to change. But people, the closest thing we all have is either watching Star Trek or the Jetsons, and that doesn't seem to connect at all to our daily life today. So our idea was to have you live that life. See what you'd be eating, see how it would be delivered to your house, have you, if you have a deeper interest in something, have you be able to go in and listen to a TED Talk or see an animated diagram of how your solar battery system, a heat pump is going to work. And then be able to adjust it as we see new breakthroughs in technology. We can upgrade the platform and show you what's coming.
Interesting. Well, Carolyn, if you expand on this, what's the reception been to it so far in terms of what is the experiential results when you show this stuff, the reactions?
So at this point, we're talking about it. We're starting to build it. I think the response here at NYU and at School of Professional Studies has been quite extraordinary, and that's why we're sitting here, because we really have gotten buy-in from leadership, from ED and Hammett, Liz Haas, who's here, Mark Beckman. You know, it started, I look at Amy as kind of a magic area, and she just has this extraordinary ability to sort of think beyond what is. And so the conversation started around something that NYU did last week, 2040 Now. So across the university, there were many events to bring students into spaces where they could imagine 2040. They could be thinking about what the university might look like, what the city will look like, what the world might look like, under a very sort of different energy system, thinking about how we mitigate against climate change. And that was sort of that moment when we were talking about what to do about 2040 Now. This project, and then because SPS has the Metaverse Collaborative, it just seemed like a kind of an ideal fit. And you know, something as educators, there's so much information out there, and I see when you're in the classroom, lots of data, lots of really strong evidence to support the direction and the transition that we need to make. But then sort of helping students to imagine it and to take them to what that can look like. And that's where the Metaverse offers us this very unique space where we can take the scientific evidence, we can take the data from the International Energy Agency's different transition pathways and bring it in and bring the evidence in, do it in a very engaging, entertaining, and smart way that I think is very appealing to young people, and I think all of us do better when we can experience and be part of what we see as the change that we need to make.
Great. Well, I want to delve deeper into the sort of the theory of change behind this. First, I do want to bring in Paul on this side. I'd love to see your slides as well, and sort of basically sort of what the rendering of Charleston looks like on that first of all.
We got Paul Turner from Charleston. So, quick story. How did the Charleston Metaverse get started? It got started because I asked to have coffee with the mayor. And
that's a good theory of change.
No, I hadn't had a chance to catch up with the mayor for a couple of years, and I said it's time to have coffee. So I emailed his administrative assistant, which runs the city, and tells the mayor where to go and when to be there. And I didn't hear back, and I'm like, well, that's odd. So I emailed again. I didn't hear back. So then I have one rule: if people don't answer my email, then I will sort of go a little ballistic. So I saw the mayor at a social gathering, and I just said, your staff support is really, not up to par. He said, what do you mean? He said, I've emailed twice and I haven't gotten a response. He said, well, here's my personal email. Email me anytime. Good politician. And so I did. And I thought I was going to get coffee. And I got an email back from his scheduler within a couple of days. And she said, the mayor will see you in his office on January 4th with his senior staff. And I said, okay, I better have something to say. So I took about 2 years worth of thinking, and I put together what I call 3 big ideas in 3 years: virtual Charleston, augmented reality Charleston, and the Charleston Metaverse. And we went in to talk about virtual Charleston, which is our dream to build a 3D digital twin, real-time digital twin. But we decided, what problem would that solve for the city? And so we thought through all the problems, and then luckily for me, the mayor just done a state of the city's address. We said, these are my 3 big problems: flooding, i.e. climate change, security, and affordable housing. Those are the 3 big problems in urban Charleston, like a lot of urban cities. But we have a major problem with climate change in Charleston. Every time it rains and we have a king tide, downtown floods. Now, we don't need a hurricane, we just need a rainstorm and a king tide, and you can't drive through Charleston. So we put these 3 big ideas out, and we talk about our vision for building a digital twin, and why would we want one. So we can visualize what we call it, colloquially, we call it the seawall. He has a lot of euphemisms that are dressed up, but we just call it the Charleston seawall. Nobody wants the seawall. No local Charlestonians want the seawall. It's going to be 12 feet high to mitigate climate change through 100 years. And if you've ever been to Charleston, that's the view. That's the view that people take for. That's what draws tourists to Charleston. And so we sketched this idea out, and he really liked it. But oddly enough, he asked a lot of questions about the Metaverse. like, what is this Charleston Metaverse? And of course, I didn't come prepared to talk about the Charleston Metaverse. I came prepared to talk about building the digital center. So if you flip the slide, just to kind of set the stage, if you flip past me. This is the way I think about the Charleston Metaverse. Charleston, we're all about the past. That's what draws people to Charleston. So some part of the Metaverse that we're going to build is going to be a way to look into the past. Because the past is what got us to the present. And the way I think about the Metaverse, in Charleston anyway, is imagine a time 100 years from now, when we look back at this period of time, what will we call it? 100 years ago in Charleston, there was a period of time we now call the Charleston Renaissance, which was like the Harlem Renaissance. You ask people in art, they know the Harlem Renaissance, but they don't know the Charleston Renaissance. An equally interesting time where artists, poets, writers, musicians, historic preservationists all came together, and the city we know today was birthed 100 years ago. But I would like to say the Charleston Metaverse is birthing the city we hope to see 100 years from now. So we flip the slide. And, we're going to use the tools that everybody's aware of, virtual reality, augmented reality. My interest and expertise is in augmented reality, because I want to be able to take a person to the place where the seawall will be. It's going to take 10 years if we ever build a seawall. It'll be 10 years from now. The biggest thing people are struggling with in Charleston is, what is it going to look like? We see artist conceptions from the Corps of Engineers, which people in Charleston have learned to not trust artist conceptions of what the landscape is going to look like. But the thought we have is, I should tell you, the seawall is going to be 8 miles long. It's going to go all around the perimeter of Charleston. So we want to be able to walk that entire 8-mile, boundary and be able to see what the seawall is at any point in that 8 miles. So that's the big vision. And so the bigger brand, if you will, is the Charleston Metaverse. Underneath the Charleston Metaverse is augmented Charleston, augmented seawall, virtual Charleston, digital twin of Charleston. But we're just using the Metaverse right now because it's very much in the public mind. We're just calling everything we're working on with all these technologies the Metaverse. Put one more slide. And it's going to focus in Charleston. What I would argue is we've been doing a series in Charleston called, for our AR/VR meetup group, our 10 stalwarts that show up for every meeting, thinking about these things and talking about. We did a 3-part series that I started called Building the Metaverse. What is it going to take to build the Metaverse? And so we've been doing building blocks, like we need mapping, we need Unity, we need augmented reality tools. Those are the tools. But what are we building? What are we going to build these other things? And in Charleston, and I argue that the Metaverse is really metaverses. So the Charleston Metaverse may be different from the New York Metaverse or the Amsterdam Metaverse. There is no Metaverse, in my opinion. There are metaverses. And I think the best we can do is have them to be highly local and respond to the needs of each community. So in Charleston, it's going to be about art, architecture, and history. Flip to the next slide. And this is the topic of the day, and it's very much about sustainability, resilience, and climate change. We feel like we can use the tools of the Metaverse to really help have a deeper conversation about how we're going to respond to climate change. It's not just going to be building an ugly 8-mile-long wall designed by the Corps of Engineers. That's our goal.
Great, thank you, Paul. All right, well, this sets up, I think, 2 very interesting threads intertwined in this panel, which is, the first is, let's take climate change for a second. I mean, obviously, one of the most politicized subject in America based on the Pew polling I've seen. The widest divergence between political party affiliations is around climate change. So first you have this notion, this positive notion that we've had for years. We show people the data, we show people something objective, they will respond to the need to address climate change, which of course is not happening with political polarization. So there's that one. And then the second one with the metaverse and VR, I mean, you have people like Paul Verlucky, founder of Oculus, who once described VR as an empathy machine. I think that was before he started selling weapons to the military-industrial complex. But he didn't say that. And we have thinkers like Jane McGonigal, who's basically written and spoken at length about the power of games to help people imagine worlds. So my question is we all believed at one point that climate change was something that could be argued logically based on data and points, and that failed. We also believe that seeing is believing is a theory of change in this. What features of your projects do you think will give that tipping point that will change hearts and minds? Is it a question of fidelity of the images? Is it a question of the rendering of the environment? Is it a technical thing? Is it an experiential thing? We don't have the data yet because you guys are both building your projects, but what is it about it that you think that will actually cause that behavioral change, which is very elusive in the subject of climate change?
So we had a meeting last week for 2040 Now Week where we had students from NYU come and participate in a futures, exercise. And we had technical experts, people who are energy experts or people who are climate scientists and so forth, to mentor the students in each of the scenario storytelling exercises, under different boundary conditions. How bad is the impact of climate change? How much technological breakthrough do we have? Do we have milder impacts, but a lot of technology, or high impacts and no technology? Where are we coming? And I think the big takeaway from this meeting, which is really surprising, I often do this as a training program for Fortune 500 companies, but this was a really unique experience because it was all young people from NYU, many of whom are either studying a topic because they believe that the climate crisis is a pressing problem, but there are other students who are just concerned about it. It's not what they're doing in their studies. And almost universally, these visions that they created for 2040 were really rooted in the idea that they are going to generationally have behavioral change. And that made it really distinct from the professional scenario, TCFD, Task Force on Climate Disclosure, kind of exercises that people do in the private sector, and even on the urban level, city of New York, so forth. So our idea is really to tap into that, right? So today, some of you probably go into the Metaverse, and whether it's in gaming or some other, sort of artistic participation, and you can own things in the Metaverse that you couldn't afford in real life. And there's this very consumerist, wealthy person, my house in the Metaverse is, I get this many tokens, and so I have a, 50,000 square foot home with a helipad, right? But we don't want to be training people to try to aspire to live that way. We want people to be able to go with their intuition, like these students that came and did the scenario, that you're willing actually to change your diet a little bit, and actually we kind of know that if we went to a more sustainable diet with more sustainable food, we could be healthier, on top of the fact that it would be better for the planet. And we can allow people to come into the Metaverse, and you're picking your home, and we can give you choices that we all know in VR world and interactive digital. We can reinforce things with tokens and other kinds of badges and so forth. So you can make these choices, and we can show you, educate you as to the actual consequences of your choices, the positive impact they have in terms of emissions, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of sustainability, and show you in a way that makes it not the way the dialogue is today, which is if I make you do these things, the city of New York is going to regulate your garbage. The city of New York is going to regulate this. You can't take a car into the city in the following place, or you can't park. There's all these you can't. And so you're faced with this choice of either caring about climate change and going along with all these restrictions, or saying, the hell with it, there's too many restrictions, we don't even know if it's going to work. So what we want to show you is that there are these choices that we're going to make, and they can be positive. And the way you're going to live is truly, I mean, 'cause I've written a book on this, I mean, it's going to be more enjoyable than the way you live today. And it's going to be enabled by all kinds of interesting breakthroughs in mobility, in entertainment, in food, and it's going to be, I think, democratized. Like, you're going to be able to have an energy system that you do with your neighbors, or what you do with yourself using your own home. And I don't think that people really understand that vision, and I think that if I write it down and gave you an essay in an academic journal, like, that's not going to do anything. It might help me with other professionals, and we're going to advise, you know, President Biden what to put in the Inflation Reduction Act. But that doesn't help me get you to understand that there's a really positive future that we could embrace that would both make our life more enjoyable, more creative, more entertaining.
Yeah.
But also completely reduce emissions and completely lower the amount of oil we use.
Let me stop there, and I'll come back to you in a second. I'll hear from Paul as well on this too. I think this does raise some interesting questions about not just creating the environment, but how it is populated, how it is programmed, how we think about these as experiences. So the first thought I had is, given how we've seen with the demonization of 15-minute cities, I'm already imagining a Tucker Carlson segment where, you know, NYU was created a torture chamber of the future, and like you can imagine the demonization of this very easily.
He's no longer at Fox.
I know he'll create his own media platform soon enough, I'm sure. But also, you know, for those of you who were on the tour yesterday with In Situ, which is, again, that sort of notion of showing people what development will look like to basically get community buy-in. Nick was telling me a story where like local members of the community came out wondering what we were doing in the West Village, and then some of them went to go get a community board member, presumably to mobilize against the development. So I think we accelerated the NIMBYism curve in that particular project inadvertently. Paul, how do you know, or what are your thoughts on how we render that 8-mile seawall for the entire length of it, that people are going to go in there and enjoy it, or do you even turn them around? Do you have to stock tour guides? Do you have to put signs on it? How do you think of it as a I mean, this gets this larger question about the Metaverse as a political project in this regard as well, too, about what do we want to show. And the history of Charleston, of course, is also fraught in that regard, too.
Yeah, so what I would say is, I mean, if we look back in 2 years on our 3 big ideas in 2 years, we would say, how do we judge their success? I would say, if we really get social engagement in the broadest possible sense. We're talking about sustainability and resilience, but how do we get engagement on the other problem in the city, which is affordable? Right now, there's a proposal to take all of the older public housing and tear it down and build a new public housing neighborhood somewhere else. But what will happen to that old? That's going to destroy the fabric of the neighborhoods. You know, just because we move people to a different location, that's a pretty drastic proposal. That's a proposal on the books. And the Charlestonians are very engaged on the seawall, but it would be nice to have a platform, and that's our goal. Is the digital twin of Charleston is that the seawall is the pressing issue, and that's where we hope people will actually write a check to help us build virtual Charleston and get this conversation started, because that is the problem of the day. But we also have transportation problems. I can visualize using the Charleston Metaverse, which again, just think about that as the brand for these pieces of the Metaverse, which is right now a digital twin of the city of Charleston, which is why the mayor talked about a digital twin. He's connected the digital twin of Charleston with the Metaverse, which I think is great. To me, it's a foundational step to the Metaverse. But what if we visualize Charleston at a certain point? It's called South of Broad, which is, we divide the city into North of Broad, South of Broad, and all the historic district is mostly South of Broad. I would like to visualize what does that look like with no traffic, with no cars, like Singapore proposed, or even New York has talked about that. What would that look like? I would think it would be very positive. So that's one idea that I have, is we would use this as a tool to help visualize possible futures that would be.
Well, I think it's great, and I just wrote it back in March at Cornell Tech. We had an event on this with Spectre Cities in Numina, which is a client and is a virtual architecture firm that is doing that. Is creating metaverse reference cities to spawn these ideas. Paul, the question I have for you is quickly, who will own this metaverse? Is this a public good controlled by the public? Will administrations in charge of it? Is it used to test ideas, and will it change with administrations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent question. Who owns the metaverse?
Yeah, who owns the Charleston metaverse?
Metaverse. We build a digital twin of the city. We talked about that.
I think it's this.
So, do the developers own it? Does the city own it? Does the citizens own it?
It raises some interesting questions. I'll come to Carolyn. You mentioned, like, you want to see the streets that have traffic. It makes me think, like, number one, is it tied to, is it tied to the mayor? Is it tied to a political agenda? Is it like a giant simulator where you rent time on it? You get to go test out your version of Charleston and invite people to it? These are just some interesting practical questions.
Let me just intervene on one thing to your comment. So, if you create a platform, the same way we have things that we enjoy in our daily life, and if Tucker Carlson stands up and says, people shouldn't be allowed to use contact lenses, they should be forced to wear glasses, or people should be forced to wear contact lenses and shouldn't wear glasses. None of us are going to pay attention to that because we have personal choice. So my point to you would be, that is the whole point of doing this thing, is to really show people that they have these personal choices, that that we can empower ourselves, that we don't have to wait for a commentator or a politician to tell us how we're going to work in a way that we can all not have to build a seawall even higher, and we're going to be able to live in a way where we're not going to have to shutter in our homes for months at a time because it's severe weather, right? I mean, we and the idea is to bring in, so credibility is a big thing. So, why a university? Because we can bring experts from around the world and technologists from around the world who are developing these technologies that you're going to have in your home and you're going to see on a city street and you're going to see when you go out to dinner, right? And we can have teams of people help us develop the scenarios and the choices that are going to be available. And these are real things. I mean, I did this without doing it multimedia in a previous job, and we took a group of technical experts. We toured Silicon Valley to see what technologies were coming. We thought about how to deploy those technologies to save emissions, to make us a lower carbon society instead of the opposite. And, it's just a powerful way of taking expert things and letting you know. I mean, I don't know how, but any of you have gone to Japan and you go to the Sony building and they have all the appliances you're going to have in the future. In UC Davis, I used to work at the University of California, Davis, we had the Honda House of the Future that had all these appliances, and then you plug your car in with generate the electricity for them. I mean, there's just things coming that are fun to see, and it's fun. My feeling is, you could be a commentator and say something against it, but if it's fun, it's fun.
Well, I love that. And this gets back to, and I want to hear Carolyn's thoughts on this, but yeah, as you were speaking there, thinking about Paul, I imagine that, one potential trajectory of the metaverse is that in the future, we effectively vote with our attention. And, you just have every party or every issue lays out a metaverse version of what it wants to be, and then you simply go and experience it. It's a fun idea to choose. But Carolyn, your thoughts on these various philosophical issues?
So one, I do think even when you look at that Pew polling data, you do see younger people whose positions on climate change are changing regardless of what side of the political aisle they may sit on. So even, if you're thinking about this as Democrats versus Republicans, you have the Republicans acknowledging that climate change is real. I think there are oftentimes challenges about what that means in terms of action to address, mitigate, and adapt to climate change. But to Paul's point, when we're talking about, extreme flooding, which is not a matter of, if it will happen, it's really when. And so I think understanding that these are real risks. So do you want to sort of react after, after that massive trigger? or do you want to respond and be proactive before? And so I do think the metaverse is just an extraordinary space for sort of putting into place like actions that can be both sort of thinking about a world that is different, that is more sustainable, that is much more resilient. But that is also saying that this is also, you know, these are things that we can do, and people can get on board and do those things. And again, I think, you know, Amy and I, and you know, the conversations we're having here at NYU at SPS, is that this is an educational space. This is a space for not just students, but we hope to bring this, you know, also to elementary schools. We hope to really sort of, to Amy's point, you know, democratize this space that is going to be created here at NYU, but really bring it to people in a way that is entertaining, engaging, fun, and also a kind of a learning pathway that, you know, can bring these sort of really hard concepts, hard to understand pathways, and bring them to life in a very engaging, provocative way. And again, there'll always be a percentage of people who will be naysayers. We're not going to get on board. So I think if we're going for getting 100% agreement, I think we're not, you know, we're going to be very disappointed. But I definitely see a shift amongst young people. I think across the state, a lot of the data is showing that demographic shift around how young people think about climate change. They want to see more action. So this is a way to sort of bring them into a space where action is happening and they can see it.
Let me give you an example that's very, you know, downtown Manhattan example. So it's a trend now among young people who care about climate to reuse clothes, right? So you don't, they kind of rejected fast fashion, and people are shopping vintage. They're finding, you know, clothes. And in Hollywood, I have some former students and others that I'm close with in Hollywood. These TV shows have been put out, the Daisy and the Six, that show the opera that was about the making of The Godfather. You know, there have been these, Brad Pitt's movie in Hollywood, I forget what it was called, Once a Time in Hollywood. These period pieces have these phenomenal costumes. And so, in Hollywood today, people go out to dinner, and they're like, how do you like my 1962 Chanel suit? And I found these pearls that are the actual pearls that people wore with them. You know, so people are reimagining themselves and how they dress. And it's really a positive thing because you're reusing clothes, and then it's causing some of the fashion houses to think about how to allow you to bring back your clothes, and they'll adjust them or they'll repair them and so forth. It's changing what's in places like Hollywood where everybody, you know, gets ideas, or here in Manhattan people get ideas about what to wear and how to wear them. And so that's kind of like what we're talking about, right? And in Brazil, for example, when Bolsonaro was president, it was very dangerous in that society to go down to the Amazon and try to work with indigenous allies and have an actual physical protest. People found that it was very physically dangerous. And so young people started to organize themselves to move to a vegan diet to protest that the cattle industry was promoting deforestation. And it turned out as a giant wave in Brazil, which, you know, is a sort of a, you know, culturally, you know, steakhouses in Brazil were very famous. But it became it's such a big trend. I forget the statistics. There's a high percentage now of people in Brazil who are vegetarian, and it was written up in the New York Times as a big trend. So if you think about behavioral change, instead of everybody sitting here and you're waiting for some corporation to get a subsidy from the U.S. government to install something somewhere, and then that's going to solve the problem, right? We're talking about things that we can do. I mean, I can tell you, the young people in Hollywood who find these clothes and go out to clubs or to dinner with each other, wearing things from different decades, and they coordinate what they're going to wear, and they go out and have a good time. I mean, that is really enjoyable. So if I said to you, hey, I don't want you to go to the store and buy new clothes, that sounds negative, right? Or, jeans are very destructive to the environment, that sounds negative. If I tell you we're going to have a reuse party, and we're all going to exchange clothes and then go out together in new outfits, that sounds fun.
I was going to say, if you promise me the future is La La Land, I'm sold. I'm 100% on board with this. I know we're about out of time. I'm going to give Paul the last word on this. Paul, so obviously, very clearly defined objective in terms of what they want to achieve. How did you define success in the Charleston Metaverse? And not just, of course, the seawall, but also, in the sense of it ties back into yesterday's discussion in a way of destination marketing, building a digital twin of it that people can visit. How will you define success of it in 2, 3, or 10 years?
We're going to do the Charleston Metaverse 1 in the fall of 2023. So it's going to be about art. Remember I said art, architecture, history. I want to start with art because I think the artists have really appropriated these technologies and done amazing things. And so the first goal is to get people aware, to get people talking, to get people to come out into the public space. So we're going to do augmented art in the parks, in the city parks, in the fall. It's been done, but we haven't done it yet in Charleston. So that's one. And then build from there. Obviously, we hope to build a digital twin and visualize the seawall. Will we change? If we're going to measure success in 10 years, the seawall gets built, and it's beautiful. One of the positive aspects of the seawall project, and it's like multifaceted, right? It's 8 miles, is there's a major project. I don't have time to go into it. That's part of this whole conversation. It will be the biggest project that's been built in the city of Charleston in 40 or 50 years. The citizenry is all over it, and the developers are showing beautiful artist conceptions of what it will look like. But what it does do that's positive, it opens up a large chunk of the perimeter as a park for pedestrian and bicycle, and currently it's hardscape and inaccessible to the public. So that's a positive. So I think we want to use the metaverse conversation to visualize positive outcomes. And so when we look back in 10 years, if we get, I don't know how many wins we need yet, but are we going to change the whole landscape of the city? Come back in 100 years.
All right, well, great. Well, obviously, we could talk about this all day. I want to be conscious of time for our next panel. But before I thank our panelists, I just want to note that I hope you're all galvanized by this discussion in terms of thinking about, how do we use Metaverse and its associated technologies to imagine futures that we want? Because at lunch today, as discussed, we're going to go from table to table. We're going to do an exercise where we're going to challenge all of you to think about these kinds of use cases and where cities can really use these technologies to actually solve pressing problems and not just be a solution in search of a problem to solve. So on that note, I want to thank all our panelists. Give a round of applause.